a young man started dating a pretty young woman. After they courted for a long, long time, he asked her to marry her. And of course, she said yes. So as was custom, they went and talked to her parents about their new engagement. After a while, the parents were very, very excited because he was a very hardworking young man and he could surely provide for their beautiful young daughter and any future children that they may have. So for a celebration, the father told the daughter to go down to the basement with a pitcher and get some nice hot or fresh cider. She went down there and she pulled the spigot and let the cider run into the pitcher. But then she sat down on the bench and started pondering, what would I name my first child after we get married? So she sat, and the cider kept running and overflowing the pitcher. Then her mom, wondering where she was, came down to see what was taking her so long. She came down and saw her daughter sitting there with all the cider running all over the floor. She said, "Daughter, what are you doing?" And the daughter told her, "I'm thinking about what I should name our first child after we're married." And the mom said, that is something to wonder about. So she sat down next to her daughter and started thinking alongside her. Then, after a few more minutes, the father started to wonder what was taking his girls so long. So he too went down to the basement. He saw the cider running all over the floor and he was really mad because he worked hard for that cider and he did not like to waste his money. So he was like, "What are you girls doing?" And they said, "Well, we're thinking about what we should name the firstborn after they get married." And he said, I guess that is something to study about. I never thought of that before. And all three of them started sitting there and thinking about what to name the first child. Well, the young man waiting upstairs got really thirsty and was really confused as to what it was taking so long. So he too went down to the basement and he saw the three of them sitting there and asked, "What are you doing?" And they said, "We're thinking about what to name your firstborn child after you get married." And so the young man said, "You are three of the biggest fools I have ever met. I will go on a journey, and if I find three fools as big as you, then I will come back and we shall be married." So he left on his journey. First, he encountered a man jumping up by a bush and jumping down, and then jumping up and then jumping down. And there were clothes hanging on the bush. So the young man asked, "What are you trying to do?" And the man said, "Well, I'm trying to get into my pants. I'm jumping up and jumping back down, but I just can't seem to get in them." So the young man said, "Why don't you try grabbing them and pulling them on your legs?" And the other man said, "That's a good idea. I think I'll try that." And the young man said, "Well, there's one fool," and continued on his journey. Then he encountered a man with a rope around a cow and trying to pull him up onto a barn. And the young man said, "What are you trying to do here?" And the other man said, "Well, there's a bunch of grass up here on the roof of the barn, and I'm trying to pull my cow up to try and get her to eat some." And the young man said, "Well, why don't you just throw all the grass down to her?" And he said, "Oh, well, that's a good idea. Maybe I'll try that." And the young man said, "Well, there's two fools," and continued on his journey. Next, he encountered a young woman with a plank coming out of her door and an empty wheelbarrow rushing in and rushing out and rushing in and rushing out. And the young man asked her what she was doing. And she said, "Well, I just scrubbed my kitchen and I'm trying to bring in some sunshine to help dry it out." And the young man said, "Why don't you just open all the doors and windows and let it air out that way?" And she said, "Well, I never thought of that before." And the young man said, well, there's three fools. I guess it's time I go back and get married." And they did. The end.